Labour leader Keir Starmer will aim to address big issues in his first keynote speech to the Labour conference, including plans to recruit thousands of teachers and new targets for mental health.
But after a conference marred by divisions over party rule changes and the resignation of the left-winger Andy McDonald from the shadow cabinet, is Labour back in business and ready for power? We're joined now by Shadow Justice Secretary David Lammy. David Lammy, we've already seen you on the programme this morning, warming up. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Do you find it dispiriting when the same old divisions keep coming to the surface in Labour, and instead of the party having an outward-looking, unifying theme to put to the country in any general election, seem to be working out how to unify themselves?
Well, look, I said on the conference floor that for too long the Labour Party has been airing its dirty linen in public. And it's time to bring the washing in from the line. I think that, look, at the start of this conference, because Keir is determined to make the party outward-looking, he's determined to make the party responsive to the British people, yes, it was a bit scrappy and a bit bumpy, but he's come out of it cool as a cucumber, a fighter. He's got his way in terms of some of those party reforms. We have been responsive to the British people. And now, today, he sets out his vision. He talks about where he's coming from, his own story, if you like. And it's his first time doing that for the British people because of the pandemic. And he sets a course of action. And we leave this conference very, very clear on what the purpose is. And that is to win. To win the next election. Not to talk to ourselves, not ideology, but to win.
And the last time you and I spoke, I think was just during the first lockdown, and I asked you whether Labour was in a winning position. At the time you said, no, we're not. How do you feel about that now? Is Labour, against what I think is one of the worst governments this country has ever had, that you should be destroying day in and day out, is Labour yet in a winning position?
Well, Alistair, you know that in our job I shouldn't sort of pay too much heed to the polls, but it's been pleasing to see a bounce in the polls for Labour, moving from that position of being in opposition to being a government in waiting. That's the Rubicon that we've got to cross over these next few months. I think that we're back into politics as normal. I think the decision that Boris Johnson made to raise taxes for the British people to fund social care and the National Health Service did that. I think the fuel crisis demonstrates that after a period where all we wanted to talk about was Brexit, all we wanted to talk about was the pandemic, we're into politics as normal. That's a huge opportunity for the Labour Party if it's responsive to where the British people are, if it's on the issues. And that journey began at this conference for our party. We've got some way to go before the next general election.
David, can we trust Sir Keir Starmer? We had a debate earlier about when Boris Johnson reneges on things that he has promised, he's called a liar. When Sir Keir Starmer reneges on things that he's promised, that's simply being flexible. You know, that's a political interpretation, isn't it? I mean, for instance, Keir Starmer does not back an increase in the minimum wage to £15 an hour, despite the fact that when he was campaigning 2 years ago for workers at McDonald's, he said they should earn £15 an hour. In his leadership manifesto, when he got elected by the party, he made a commitment to common ownership, but he doesn't back nationalising, for instance, the energy industry. I mean, that's not about washing dirty linen in public. That is the voters thinking, hang on a moment, he says one thing at one point and then changes his position on it. So either he's lying, they don't know whether to trust him.
I've got to tell you, I don't think we call Boris Johnson a liar enough. He made all sorts of promises to the British people, and they're now unravelling.
That's why we've got skills shortages across the country. But when Sir Keir Starmer promises something and changes position, you wouldn't call him a liar.
Supplies across the country, and you can't get people across the country. But let's be clear about Keir. Keir has been absolutely clear. This is not about ideology. If the British people are saying to us, actually, yes, we'd like to see the railways nationalised, if they're saying to us there's a problem with energy and we need to do something about it, then we'll be responsive to that. But we're not going to just say that we want common ownership for the sake of it because it comes out of some PhD thesis. That's not what being a proper, serious political party can be about. So he's absolutely ruled that out. And on the minimum wage...
Sorry, so hang on a moment. He said it's a value... Sorry, David Lammy, sorry. He said common ownership is a value that he holds dear. Now you're saying he's ruling it out. It's either a value you hold dear or it's a value you rule out. You can't have them both.
Look, of course it's a value. Of course it's a value. But that doesn't mean you want a wholesale renationalisation of every single industry in the country.
Not every single industry.
You've got to be responsive to what we could afford, for starters.
So would you bring energy back into common ownership? If it's a value you hold dear, would you bring it back into common ownership?
I'm really clear. I knocked on so many doors at the last general election across the country, and people raised with me, why are you proposing free broadband? Why are you proposing a 4-day week? Why do you want to renationalise everything? This isn't what we want. We have to listen to people and hear what they're saying.
A lot of people have been with energy companies,
the crisis in energy,
and those businesses have gone bust, and they are now, facing a huge rise in their bills. So would you bring energy back into common ownership?
So the case for bringing energy back into common ownership is much greater than in other sectors. We have not said that we will do that yet, and that must rightly be for Rachel Reeves and for Ed Miliband as Climate Secretary, not for me as Justice Minister. But clearly, that is a sort of area where you might see a proposal from the Labour Party.
David, can I ask you about... You and I fought very hard, failed, to get a people's vote, a referendum on the Brexit deal. And yet since then, my sense has been the Labour Party is really scared of the issue, doesn't really want to call out Brexit for the damage that it's doing to the country. Where do you stand on the extent to which Brexit is responsible for some of the problems that we're seeing in the economy right now?
I'm really clear. Brexit is responsible for some of the problems we're seeing. On this fuel crisis, there are not queues to get fuel in France, in Spain, in Germany, but there are queues in our own country. And that is as a result of exiting in the European Union with the deal that Boris struck,
and you voted
has
for,
us out of a
and
customs
you guys voted
union,
for it,
which means that look, because in the end we can't rehearse the issues around Brexit. But this was his deal. We hold him to account for his deal, and what it means is that. Why would drivers come here when they're going back without goods, when they've got to pay tariffs? They'd rather be in another country in Europe. And as a consequence, this is what we've got. So Boris made the promises, and it's our job to hold him to account for those promises. And I'm quite clear that the whole of it doesn't really matter whether he's Boris or Johnson or whatever. He's useless, is what he is, Alistair. That's what he is. And by the way, it's not just shortages of fuel. It's shortages across our farming and agriculture. It's shortages in building supplies. Try getting a builder these days. It costs a fortune. And he is responsible. And you're absolutely right. We have to go toe-to-toe with him and hold him to account for the promises that he's made that he's now not delivering on.
But Keir seems much more reluctant to speak in those terms that you've just been speaking now.
Well, he hasn't said anything yet. He's got his speech.
I'm talking about generally. I'm talking about generally. Since the Brexit deal, Keir has been very reluctant, it seems to me, to get engaged in the debate about the consequences of Brexit at all.
I think, with all fairness, Alistair, the whole country's been preoccupied with the coronavirus pandemic. There has not been a lot of bandwidth to talk about other issues. The only other issues that really have entered the stage over the last year was the murder of George Floyd and the issues around Black Lives Matter and the issues around climate change. That's about it, really. But as I said, I think we are getting back to politics as normal. And clearly, the British economy and some of the decisions that have been made by this government and exiting the European Union with the deal that they struck has had results. And the Labour Party has got to hold the government to account for that. And we've got to get into these issues. And we will.
All right, David Lammy, there we must leave it. Thanks very much indeed.